Welcome to week 7 on subcultural or subculture theory. This is part 1 of 2 of this week's lecture. Subcultural theorists are linked to the work of Durkheim and Merton. Subcultural theorists believe that the deviance results from those who hold different values from the mainstream. Deviance that is away from the consensus values is due to the inability of individuals to achieve goals through approved means. Since individuals cannot attain the culturally sanctioned goals through legitimate means, they look to illegitimate means, which puts them in a subculture. Subcultural theorists criticize and build on Merton's theories of strain and responses to strain. One of the first subculture theorists was Cohn. In 1955, Cohn came out with his theory of subcultures. He believed, agreeing with Merton, that deviance was largely a lower class phenomenon, but he advocated that much deviance was committed by groups, not individuals acting alone like Merton thought. Merton also focused on utilitarian deviance. He was focused on crime committed to gain something material, like theft or burglary. And Cohn believed that Merton failed to consider non-material crime, particularly violent crime like rapes and murders, that had no material gains for the perpetrators. Cohn focused on studying the lives and actions of working-class boys. He saw that young working-class males faced enemy in middle-class dominated educational institutions. He said that the boys were culturally deprived, and the combination of enemy and deprivation meant that they found themselves at the bottom of status hierarchies. So they felt disconnected from the culture, and they also felt deprived of the middle-class culture that their families could not provide them with. Yet they were exposed to the expectations of the culture in classrooms. This led to what he termed status frustration, saying that the boys had a low status. They were at the very bottom of the social status, and they were unable to accept and adapt to this low status. Consequently, these boys rejected mainstream middle-class goals of achieving values like becoming wealthy or becoming educated. And they started a subculture with delinquent means to achieving these goals. So, for instance, a delinquent subculture would be one where being wealthy is valued, but one can get to wealth through theft or through trickery of some other sort, not through working hard and having a full-time job. Cohn says that these subcultures develop an alternative status hierarchy. The culture's values are formed as hostile reactions to the outside world, where the subculture's members have lived. Mainstream culture's values are turned on their heads. For instance, most people would claim that mainstream culture values working hard, but as a means to get what you want, but in these subcultures, working hard is seen as something to be disdainful of. The easier wealth can come to you, the better you are. So relaxing, chilling, these are the subculturally approved ways of being wealthy or getting to wealth. The strengths of Cohn's theory is that he offers non-utilitarian explanations. So in other words, he allows for crime that isn't just about gaining material items. Like vandalism sexual assaults, and hate crimes. These are all types of crimes that are, by any definition, not about maintaining material goods. So Merton wouldn't have been able to explain these sorts of crimes through strain, but Cohn's theory can. Some criticisms of the theory are that it assumes that middle class and working class boys start off with the same values. So it actually assumes that everyone starts off with the same values. So what if working class boys never had the values that middle class boys start with? What if working class culture imparts different values onto its children, so working class boys never experience the disconnect from not being able to measure up to middle class values that both Cohn and Merton discuss? So how would you explain someone ending up a criminal then? The theory falls apart. In the 1960s, Cloward and Olin utilized and advanced subculture theories. They built on Merton's work and Cohn's work, arguing that working class individuals were denied opportunities to achieve monetary success, and that deviance was the response to denied opportunity. But they argued that not everyone responds to being able to achieve monetary success in the same way. So Cohn really thought that you had one way that you reacted to not being able to live up to a culture's goals. Cloward and Olin say that that's not true, that there are many different types, specifically 3 different types of possible reactions. Cloward and Olin thought that you may fail in achieving the societal goal of being rich by working in a legitimate job, and they also realized that you might fail at the subcultural goal of being rich through criminal activities by constantly screwing up the crimes you commit, getting caught by police, and getting arrested. So they posited that there are 3 types of subcultures, and those subcultures are based on the neighborhood where you grew up. Does it have a criminal culture? Can young boys be mentored by older criminals? The 3 types of criminal subcultures that Cloward and Olin outlined are criminal subcultures, conflict subcultures, and retreatist subcultures. Criminal subcultures exist in neighborhoods where there is a quote-unquote apprenticeship program. Older boys and men teach younger boys how to commit crimes. This happens with drug cartels. There's a hierarchy that flows down, and the individuals work their way up in terms of the power they hold in the group. And at the most intimate level, drug cartels are operated by street drug dealers who are dealing with people face-to-face, the buyers of their drugs face-to-face. Second, there's the conflict subculture. In the conflict subculture, there's a lot of people in a fairly small neighborhood, so it's a high-density neighborhood, and not everyone agrees on the values of that neighborhood. This is the closest to Cohn's theories, that it considers alternatives to crime and non-utilitarian crimes. Finally, Cloward and Olin talk about retreatist subcultures, which is basically what happens when criminals are bad at being criminals. They fail at achieving the goal that the subculture lays out for them through the means that the subculture approves of, crime. And prior to joining the subculture, they had already failed at achieving mainstream cultural goals through approved means. Consequently, these individuals give up on life and indulge in drug use or alcohol use in many but not all cases. One of the large problems with Cloward and Olin's subculture theory and the theorists who base their work on Cloward and Olin is that the theory ignores the crimes of the wealthy and middle class. Why do white-collar criminals commit crimes? There's no hope in using Cloward and Olin to explain these actions. But Cloward and Olin do recognize different types of deviance and the resulting subcultures. However, there is no clear difference between the different types of subcultures. If you saw one of these subcultures on the street or people interacting in one, you wouldn't be able to tell which type of subculture it was. Take, for instance, organized gangs. Gangs typically exist in neighborhoods that are high density, where not all the residents agree on the norms, so gang culture and gang crime might fall into the conflict subculture. But gangs also have leaders, and there is an apprenticeship program in many gangs where existing members teach new members how to perform crimes and sometimes force new members to commit crimes in order to become full-fledged members of the gangs. So gangs could fall into the criminal subculture. Which one is a better fit for gang activity? Cloward and Olin do not offer a way to clarify this. As discussed, this theory also assumes that everyone has the same goals to start with, and that may not be true. Goals could be different based on classes, as Miller argued in 1962. Miller stated that deviance arises from the underachievement of a person in meeting their own goals, that is, goals that person defines for themselves, not from failing to meet mainstream goals. Miller didn't think that individuals were that attached to mainstream goals. He really felt that this disappointment came from not meeting goals that they had set out for themselves. Miller went on to develop focal concerns theory, which is a subsect of subculture theory, by discussing the behavior of street gangs made up of young males whom, he says, focus on 6 key concerns. Miller's 6 focal concerns were trouble, toughness, smartness, excitement, autonomy, and fate. He said that youths focused on trouble, that they accepted that their lives will involve violence, and they would not run away from fights constantly because they knew it was just a part of life. He said that working class youths' lives were concerned with toughness, as it was associated with a masculinity that mandates finding expression and courage in the face of physical threat and rejects being timid and weak. In practice, he said, this results in assault and battery as the group attempts to maintain its reputation. He said that working class individuals were concerned with smartness, in that they want the capacity to outfox, outwit, dupe, and take others through tricks that include hustling, being a con man, being a card shark, being a pimp, being a pickpocket, and being the petty thief. So different type of smartness than mainstream society discusses. Miller thought that working class youth were concerned with excitement. They wanted to be involved in a search for thrills and emotional stimulus. And in practice, that meant sometimes gambling, sexual adventures, drugs, alcohol. He believed that working class youth wanted autonomy, the desire to control their own lives, and also that they were interested in fate. They believed that little could be done about their lives, and so they must just accept it. Furthermore, Miller thought that the peer group for these men demanded close conformity to the norms of the group, and people wanted to achieve status in the group. Miller said that this was emotional involvement and implied that delinquency was learned from this culture rather than the result of or reaction to not being able to live up to another culture's goals. More recently, subculture theories have looked at institutions. Messner and Rosenfeld in 2001 said that stemming from the idea of the American dream, individuals became obsessed with wealth and the winner-take-all mentality. The pressure that individuals are put on to achieve the results encourage crime. Furthermore, schools teach skills, they no longer teach values. So education plays a major part in crime by first emphasizing how important being wealthy is, second, by no longer teaching values to people, and third, by not giving everyone skill sets with which they can become successful. Later theorists noted that societies with free markets and fewer welfare programs have the highest crime rates. Downs and Hansen found that the more money a country spends on welfare, the lower its imprisonment rate is. And Savelsberg noted that a rising crime rate in Eastern Europe came after the fall of communism. So after the social welfare state began to be dismantled, you saw crime rates and imprisonment rates rise. In short, that there started to be more subcultures. Looking at subcultural theories, victims of serious violence and their criminal behavior by Singer. Singer's paper utilizes subculture to examine one of the most pressing problems in criminal justice, when being a victim of violence leads one to become a perpetrator of violence. Singer introduces the paper by stating, quote, "There's a reason to believe that, under some conditions, victimization experience precedes and facilitates criminal behavior. For example, in reaction to their victimization, juveniles may seek the support of a gang or possession of a weapon. Similarly, violent victimization experienced in the home or school may contribute to the lack of attachment and involvement juveniles feel towards their parents or formal education. So essentially, we know that for some crimes, before the perpetrators were perpetrators of that crime, they were victims of that same crime." We don't know exactly why this is. We know that for some crimes, that perpetrating the crime, quote unquote, neutralizes or crosses out the stigma of being a victim of that crime. That is the basic idea that retaliation is the result of a criminal act. So the subculture of violence can start out as a reaction to violence, even if the risk that one carries by retaliating also means that it carries an increased risk of further victimization. Subcultures that start around violence lead to the development of violent values and attitudes and the social learning of violence, which also encompasses juveniles in its wake. Since the poor are more likely to be victims of violent crime, the poor are thus also more likely to encounter these cultures of violence and then join them. The threat of victimization is seen as a motivating force for violent gang activity, whether in the name of self-defense or in the name of protection. Violence is perpetrated by victims tends to be centered in certain neighborhoods and is likely to involve both homicide and assault. Juveniles, we know, enter this subculture because it is close to them, it serves as a form of self-protection, and because they want status and prestige from their peers. Studies have generally tested the theories about subcultures of violence by correlating demographic characteristics, especially class, to attitudes about violence or with crime rates in the areas in which a respondent lives, but both of these are problematic. One of the reasons that this is problematic is because the measurement of quote-unquote violent attitudes is subjective. Think to yourself, what would you classify as a violent attitude? How would you measure a quote-unquote violent attitude on a survey? Second, the presence of a violent culture does not necessitate that there is violent behavior from everyone living in the culture, but most studies discuss violent culture like it does mean that everyone in an area that has a violent culture also exhibits violent behavior. So we need data on individuals and individuals' likelihood to commit beliefs or to commit acts of violence and believe in violence, not neighborhood level beliefs or neighborhood level rates of crime that we attribute to all the individuals living in a neighborhood.